Hi, welcome to Brown Bag Lit. We're so happy to see you here. I'm Chloe Miller, the co-founder of Brown Bag Lit, along with Shasta Grant, who's here. She and I conceived a Brown Bag Lit late last year. We started classes and readings in January of this year, and we're happy to have you here today for our preseason pop-up event with Yael Goldstein-Love. So I'm pointing up, but I don't know where she is for you. The author of the acclaimed novel, The Possibilities, which hopefully you've had a chance to look at. If not, can purchase soon. So this fall, we hope that you'll join us for our brand new First Draft Club, a class or reading. You can find all of our upcoming events on our website, brownbaglit.com. Our September First Draft Club begins soon on September 1st, and our first class will be a prose class with Shasta Grant on September 7th. And for a special today, for everyone who's attending, we are offering First Draft Club discounts and a September class discount to all of you. You're welcome to $50 off the First Draft Club for your September class and $25 off your first September class. So those are two separate discounts. Please register by midnight tonight to be eligible. Our next event is a Q&A with a literary agent named Saba Suleiman on Wednesday, September 13th. Like all of our events, it will be from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So on for today, please make sure that you stay muted during the reading. I recommend that you put the screen on speaker view during the reading and then gallery view during the Q&A. Please do keep the chat open to ask questions, follow along with the links, or share anything that you like about the work. And I see that our intern Sarah is here. If you want to unmute for a moment and say hi.
Hi, it's nice to see everybody.
Excellent. Thank you for coming and being our intern. And so we're so excited to welcome Yael Goldstein-Love. Shasta will introduce her, and then she will read for a few minutes. We'll have a Q&A, and we'll spend some time writing together. So welcome, co-founder Shasta Grant.
Thank you, Chloe. Hi, everyone. We're so glad that you're here with us today. Super excited about today's event. Yael Goldstein-Love's latest novel, The Possibilities, just released by Random House, is a speculative thriller about the psychological experience of becoming a new mother. A people pick of the week, a powerful page turner with deep wisdom, and a Good Morning America recommendation for summer reading taps into those primal feelings every nurturer feels and fears. The book grew out of Goldstein-Love's own rocky transition to motherhood, as well as her clinical experience working as a psychotherapist and psychological researcher with postpartum mothers. She is also the author of the novel Overture, The Passion of Tasha Darsky, Doubleday. She lives with her 6-year-old son in Berkeley, California. Welcome, Yael.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is such a nice community. I'll dive right in. This is a very short reading. It's like 2 minutes. But it does require a tiny bit of setup, which is that you need to know that my main character, Hannah, has just discovered that, so she has her baby in the stroller. They're in this parking garage in the office of her therapist. She's trying to get the baby into the car, and she realized she's forgotten the car key. So the elevator to get back up is broken. So she's in this puzzle that only is a puzzle if you are the mother of a new baby and are very sleep deprived, which is, how do I get this car key without, sending my kid into a tantrum and like making the whole rest of the day impossible? So she's trying to figure out this seemingly impossible puzzle in this moment. I wheeled Jack down the parking ramp and through the sliding doors back inside the building, a soulless low-rise filled entirely with medical offices. I parked the stroller just inside the doors, below the sign, "We're working on it," taped at a slapdash angle on the brushed chrome of the door to the broken elevator. It was the right spot. Impossible to see from the outside, shielded from the sun. I looked Jack over and considered covering the stroller's canopy with his blanket. He smiled back. I didn't cover him. He liked to take the world in. I swung open the door to the stairway, then stopped before stepping through. Was leaving Jack here the obvious solution, or was it unthinkable? Was I crazy for contemplating it or crazy for worrying? I knew that one of these was true, but not which. I slipped into the shadowed cool of the stairway, then whirled and caught the door before it could click closed. I poked my head out into the fluorescent glare. Back in, back out. Jack's face cracked wide. He laughed. He thought I was playing with him. Peekaboo, I said. It would take no more than 3 minutes. It was sane. I was sane, admirably sane, like a mother from the 1970s, or whenever it was supposed to be that mothers knew that worrying too much was almost as bad as not worrying at all. Like the kind of mother Adam wanted me to be. I started running up the stairs. I knew how sane I was until I reached the first landing. That's when I pictured Jack below, waiting, eager, thinking we were still playing and trusting me completely. That open mouthed smile, always halfway to a laugh, if it wasn't already mid scream. 4 flights of stairs with his torquing, thrashing body against my tiny one. But that was the sane choice. I saw that now and turned around. I took the stairs back down 2 at a time, grabbed for the door, pulled it hard, smile already plastered over my face. Peekaboo! And he was gone. That's it.
I love that scene. So good. All right, we'd love to open it up to questions. If you want to pop it into the chat, or you're welcome to raise your hand and ask it directly. We have a few more folks coming in as well.
Since we're a community of writers, and most people here, I imagine, are working on their work, I'm wondering what your schedule or routine is like for working on, especially a larger, I write poetry, so they're so small, a larger novel.
Yeah, it's my schedule since becoming a mother, my schedule has really changed. It used to be before I had kids, that I was really precious about writing time. I was like, if I am going to dive into my creative work, I must have hours cleared, and I must have, and there's no such thing as hours cleared to me. There's no hours cleared. What are these hours cleared that I used to have? And so now I'm a completely catch as catch can writer now. I see psychotherapy patients, so that's my other career. And I stagger them with an hour between if I can, almost always. More for the sake of the psychotherapy, because I don't like one person's inner world sort of like coloring in others. I want like time to reset. But because of that, so I'll finish seeing someone, I'll take like 10 minutes to do like a stream of consciousness in my own little notebook that I always do. And then I write for an hour. And so that's how I write. It's like I write between seeing people. If I have 10 minutes, I will grab that and I will write. Especially if I'm in the middle of a revision, that it's easier to grab those 10 minutes in revision than in writing from a first draft. But yeah, like that is, I write when I can and where I can. And that's basically it. And it works. If you had told me this when I was in my early 30s, I would have said like, there's no way, but it totally works.
How do you were talking about resetting between patients. How do you reset from the patient to your writing?
I think that's part of, the sort of the stream of consciousness, kind of like the sort of like the writing that I do about a session. It's part of, I do that partly because of that I can have a record of what I was feeling with there and what the major themes. And, but also I think I do that because it's like a way of saying like, okay, like I'm not going to be thinking, I'm going to put this all down. I'm not going to be thinking about this for the next hour. I'm going to like get it out of my head. And now I'm in my own space in my head. But can I always? No, of course I can't always. Sometimes, something's really particularly intense, or I'm really confused about what just happened between us, or, what's going on at this particular point in therapy. I'm not going to be able to get it out of my head, and I'm not going to be able to completely move into my own writing. But for the most part, especially when like something's really rolling with the writing, it's just sort of easy to, yep, now it's this.
Yeah, I've got a question. I adore your writing and I adore you. So question being, do any of your patients read your work and want to discuss it in therapy? And also, do any of your readers contact you and want therapy advise?
Great question. I don't know. So no, I've never had any patient tell me that they've read my work and want to discuss my work. Um, there have been a couple of times where I've like suspected that they've Googled me and know that I'm a fiction writer. And then and then if it seems relevant and there's like a natural place to bring it up, I will. And ask, or float something where they could have an opening that they could bring it up if they want to. But a few times it's turned out to be true. But like no one's ever come and be like, I want to discuss this with you. And I don't know like if that ever will happen. I feel like it's a risk one takes when you blend these two careers and like everything's grist for the mill. So as long as I can still use that conversation in service of the therapy, it's all fine. And then yes, I mean I've been getting a lot of beautiful emails in particular from this book, from a lot of postpartum mothers or mothers with older children but wanting to talk to me about their experience with maternal anxiety, telling me about like early experiences of theirs. And in quite a few of those email exchanges, they've sort of asked me advice about like how to find a good therapist, or like whether actually there have been a couple of times that I've been like talking to, I'm doing a lot of podcasts now, this is because of my book is out. And so like, afterward I'll end up talking often to the interview host for a while. And like often something that'll come up is like, here's what's happening in my therapy. Like, is this good therapy? I think it's an interesting thing. Like people often have this question of like, am I getting good therapy? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm not there. It seems like you haven't, but you should talk to that question. You should ask your therapist that question and talk about it. But, yeah. It looks like Shelley has a question.
Hi, nice to meet you. Nice to
Nice to
see
meet you.
everybody. I had a question. So is this, did you start writing this as a memoir? How did you decide like if it was going to be a memoir or a novel as my first question? And then the other question was, how did you build relationships with this publishing company to get, a major publishing house to take this on, because there's so many books about motherhood?
Yes. Well, I don't write memoir, so that was very easy. I'm a novelist. I only ever write novels. So it just never even occurred to me to write it as memoir, but also it wouldn't have worked as memoir. I mean, this book is a sci-fi thriller, which so it's like this book grew out of my own experience of early motherhood, and so it is very much about the psychological experience of motherhood, but it grew out of this thing I could not put into words in I just like noticed in the chat Kim saying, have I purchased 3 copies so far? Yes, I sure which was a very distracting and lovely thing to say. My son almost died during birth. If you read the book, there's an opening birth scene that's this harrowing birth scene, and it is my birth scene. It is what happened when my son died. And so for over an hour after he was born, no one could tell me had he lived or died. And so I lived in this bubble of pain and fear for months afterward. Because even though he was fine and I was able to bring him home, it turned out it was my instincts and insisting on a C-section, which I think I might be the only person in Berkeley to have ever done. I think I might be the only Berkeley mother to ever insisted on an emergency C-section, but I did because things did not seem like they were going well, and I was right. And if I hadn't made that call, he would have died. And so I felt like my instincts were the only thing that saved this child from death. And so my instincts might be called upon again. And so I felt as though I existed in multiple worlds simultaneously. That's not how I would have put it at the time. At the time I would have said like, I'm just terrified all the time. But and I couldn't talk about it to anyone. I didn't know how to talk about it to anyone. And when I finally figured out how I could talk to people about this and not be so isolated in my fear, it was when I hit on this sci-fi metaphor. And the sci-fi metaphor was, imagine if at the moment of birth, the laws of physics briefly change so that not only do different possibilities, different ways the world could have gone exist simultaneously, but they can affect each other. because that is what it felt like to me. That is what having a child felt like to me. It felt like anything that could have happened, not just like my son almost dying at birth, but like, that moment he almost rolled off the changing table, but I stopped him at the last minute. That moment his head almost went under the bathwater, but I like caught him. Like each of those felt like they had a reality that was too close, and that was like too close for comfort, too close for safety, as though they all existed and the membrane was too thin between realities. And so that's how I wrote it as a book. And I think without that sci-fi metaphor, without the sort of sci-fi thriller aspect, I actually could not have gotten at the psychological experience of it. And so I think it was sort of necessary to get at whatever was the memoir aspect, which is the sort of psychological aspect. It was necessary to do it in this other way, for me. But I'm a novelist and that's how I write. So, for someone else, there would have been another way to do it. In terms of how I developed, I didn't develop a relationship with this publisher. My agent does everything. My last book was with Doubleday, which is also part of PRH. I had an existing relationship with, but it's all my agent. My agent does all of that. I cultivate no publishing relationships other than with my writer friends. And then in terms of the motherhood books, I wonder if part of the reason you're asking that is because you're writing a book about motherhood. I will say it's very funny to me. And I think that your question sort of grows out of this fear. I think we have a sense that like the market could be saturated for motherhood stories. In fact, I know some people have this thought because in several podcast interviews I've done, someone has asked the question of like, are you worried that the market for motherhood stories is saturated? There've been so many lately. And I find that such a strange question, because imagine if we said that about stories about romantic love. Like, are you worried that like the market for like stories about romantic love is saturated? And I think there's something about motherhood where we think of it as like niche and like monolithic, so that we think that it could be saturated, but it can't be, because every motherhood story is its own unique. Motherhood is a relationship. It's a unique, and each relationship is going to be completely different than any other mother relationship. And so I think like, write that story. There should be as many stories about motherhood as there are stories about romantic love, as there are stories about going to war, as there are stories about like any other very normal, deep human experience. So don't worry about that. Just write your motherhood book.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for all of that. I appreciate it. Yeah, I also think that also for women, it's like we think the needle has moved, but now the needle is not moved at all when it comes to women and motherhood. And now that we're going backwards, we have to tell our stories more than ever. So
yes. And luckily, although like politically, in terms of political social forces, the needle is going backwards. In terms of, in the publishing bubble, in people's in readers' taste, the needle is still moving in terms of wanting more and more about maternal subjectivity. So I think you can keep telling those stories, and it's good.
yeah, I think my challenge right now is just like what the format is. It'll be kind of a memoir, but it's also a spiritual. I see motherhood as a spiritual journey. So, it's who I am who I am because of my kids. So, yeah. So I appreciate that. And I'm sorry I didn't know anything really about your book. I just came because I wanted a book about motherhood, and it was
no. There's no reason you should.
Thanks.
Margaret, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for this, Yael. I was curious if you identified as a writer before a therapist, or you identified as a therapist before a writer, or somehow if your two careers were simultaneous for you.
Oh, that is such a good question. Let me direct you to my therapist. I was a writer before I was a therapist, so I think that identity feels like a little more settled to me. Like I did that, for a decade before I became a therapist, and so so in some sense, I think I'm more confident as a writer. I'm more confident that I know I can do it. Still as a therapist, like it's like every day you're like, do I suck? I don't know. But but um, but I do think of them, so that's part of the answer, is that like I wear my novelist self a little more comfortably than I wear my therapist self, except for when I'm actually in the room with patients, at which point I wear it very comfortably and don't worry anymore. But but I also do, I really think of them as almost the same career to me. Like, I mean, obviously they're very, very different in many ways, in many practical ways. But to me, it's like there's only one thing that has ever deeply fascinated me, and that is, what is it like to be a human? Um, and these are just two different ways of approaching that, and getting inside people's experiences, and experiences very different from my own. And in one, I'm getting inside the experiences of people who don't exist and I'm sort of making up. And in one, it's people who do exist and I'm doing it in partnership with them and we're trying to figure it out together. But it's sort of surprising how similar those endeavors can actually feel. And in fact, like there's this way in which they feed each other. I mean, to borrow from, the woman who's, Shelley, was it? There's a sort of an almost spiritual feeling to it. Like I am not a particularly spiritual person, as a human being. I was raised as an Orthodox Jew, and so that sucked all the spirituality out of me. But I, like, when I'm speaking to people in their suffering, or even not, even in light or something, I feel the sense of the sacred, which is not a word I ever really use, but like when I am doing psychotherapy, like I feel that sense of the sacred of each person I speak to, their inner world. And I feel like that has really affected how I write. And so I think more and more they become of a piece in ways that I often don't anticipate.
Well, thank you. Thanks.
I really love not just the line of motherhood and her kind of experiences and anxiety or depression and this idea of living in all these different places, but also the community of women who were supporting her and how she had all of these various groups through time or worlds and her mother's group. So I was really, find the phrase here. I was really interested where I think I saw you posted somewhere, and then in the acknowledgements you mentioned projective identification, which I looked up, I read about a little bit, but I was wondering if you could talk some more. I didn't really understand it.
Yes, very fair. It is, so projective identification is a very confusing term that is for a very simple thing, that once you hear it, you're like, oh, this happens all the time, and I'm so glad I know it. Part of the reason it's really confusing is that psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic thought, psychodynamic thought, has this incredibly annoying habit of using the same terms for multiple different things. So it's like one person will use this term to mean this, and somebody else will use it to mean like this slightly orthogonal thing. You're like, well, how do these two fit? It's so annoying. They really undercut themselves in this. But so projective identification has several meanings. The meaning that's sort of most relevant to the book is it describes a way that we have of communicating without words. So everyone's sort of familiar with what projection is, right? So like, we project, we take something that we can't own in ourselves, our fear, our anger, our whatever it is, our joy, something that we sort of can't look at ourselves, and we think that someone else is feeling it instead. So it's like, I'm so annoyed, I'm so angry that you're late, but I don't think of myself as an angry person. So I can't tell myself that I'm angry you're late. So I think you're angry, that you're late. I'm like, why is she so angry at me? But you're not angry at me, I'm angry. So that's projection. Projective identification is where it's the next step in that process, where sometimes to make our projection work even better, to disown our feelings even more, we act in ways that actually elicit the feelings in the other person. So, in that case, like I'm late, or I'm angry, you're late. But I can't allow myself to know I'm angry because I don't think of myself as a person who's ever angry. And then and I think you're angry at me. Now I start like criticizing you in small ways, or being like, oh, like that, I can't think of a good example, but like, yeah, I'm start like being slightly irritating in multiple ways, asking you irritating questions, acting a little annoyed. And now you are angry. Now I have done it. I have taken my feeling that I want to disown and I have actually elicited it in you. And now I am sort of in connection with the feeling and I can watch you have it, but I've like really successfully disowned it for myself in this. And so that's what projective identification is. And it's it's one of our many, many defense mechanisms. And where it, at least as many people think, and I tend to agree, as feel like I've gone through this as a new mother, is like where this originates is that it is our only way of communicating before we have words. So when we're an infant, it's like you feel hungry, you feel cold, you feel scared, but you don't have concepts of hunger or cold or scared. All you know is, I feel terrible. And so what are you going to do about this? So you scream and you elicit in your caregiver this, it's like, it's this communication without words. Like I, as the caregiver, I'm now feeling your feeling of like terror and badness and the world feels like it's ending. And I probably only feel it for a split second because I have my adult mind at my disposal. And so I can think like, oh, it's been 2 hours since she's eaten, or like, oh, it's a little cold in here, he might be cold, or oh, he's tired. And so I use my mind, my adult mind, and then I try to rectify the situation and I make the baby feel better. And it's in that experience of having the mother or the caregiver, the father, any caregiver over and over again meet my feeling of terribleness with some solution, and also to, often we'll also name, oh, you're hungry, oh, you're tired, oh, you must be cold, so we're using it. And through this experience, the baby sort of learns that there is meaning to be made from their experience. And that's how we come together as infants to have a mind, to be able to think about our experience. So that's projective identification in a nutshell. And it is crucial to how the book resolves. I'm pretty sure I'm the only person to have ever made projective identification into a science fiction scene, but I don't know 100% if that's true.
I'm not going to give anything away, but is that the metaphor just for the ending or for the worlds that she is creating or existing within?
I mean, I think the projective identification, so the scene where she sort of, saves, I'm going to give a spoiler and say there's a baby in danger throughout this book. The baby is okay. I feel like I have to, it's like nobody wants to read about a baby in danger if they don't know that they're okay. The baby's okay. So like when she saves the baby, that is projective identity. Like that is sort of projective identification made into sci-fi. I think of the sort of, but it is true that like in the book, the sort of the multiverse aspect of going into these other worlds, like I think of that also as this psychological metaphor. And for me, what that is a metaphor for is the worlds within ourselves. Like each of us is walking around all the time, and we're sort of sometimes aware of it, sometimes not, but we know there is so much inside of us that we're not aware of, and that it's affecting us in these mysterious ways. Like, why did I, just to use examples with our kids, like, why did I just say that to my kid? Why did I do that? Why did I get so angry at that? And we know there are these things in us that are sort of working their way through our behavior, but we don't know what they are. And I think about these as just like worlds within us, most of which we'll never be aware of. And to me, that's what the multiverse is. And that's why I think that theme actually resonates so much with viewers and with readers, like why it's been this enduring theme, why is that it's a metaphor for our psychological experience, which is of many, many worlds inside of us. And parenthood in particular, I think forces us to look sort of open-eyed at parts of those worlds we don't otherwise look at.
Can I piggyback off that for a second? I'm wondering if you can speak to the world building for the novel, like in terms of the speculative elements and the rules that govern this, and kind of how you developed all of this. And, did you do research, or was it all just, your brain? Like, I don't know, I'm just fascinated with the world that you've built in this novel.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. So my father works in foundations of quantum mechanics. He is he's like the main guy behind like one particular interpretation of quantum mechanics, which is very opposed to the interpretation I use in this book, the many worlds interpretation. And so I was raised in a family where like that is what you would talk about at home, you know, like that, like it was much likelier that my father would be like asking me about my intuitions about quantum mechanics than about how my day was. So the science came very naturally to me. It was very easy for me to sort of to go there in my imagination. But I still did do a bit, you know, it's like I had to like brush up on some things. And so I did read some stuff. And I used some neuroscience in the book, and that I had to, you know, it's like I've taken like my neuropsych classes, but like, I don't know, yeah. I had to like read some books and figure some stuff out. And then in terms of the world building, I don't know, it's so funny. I mean, I love world. I am like a sucker for world building. Like even my son is obsessed with Pokemon cards right now. I don't know who else has like been subjected to this. And like most of the parents hate Pokemon cards. I love them. Like I am a sucker for any and all world building. Like when I'm like reading like the little powers of the Pokemon, I'm like, these are so cool. Like these are awesome. Like you slip into my dreams and like make them bad. That's amazing. But so yeah, I don't know. I mean, that was really the fun part for me, is it was the world building. And I felt, I mean, for everything in the world building, I needed every aspect of it to also function as like a reflection of the experience of motherhood. So that was sort of always the constraint, is like, okay, it could work that way. But if it worked that way, like that would be a very cool read, but like, what is that actually reflecting of the experience of motherhood? And I wanted everything, like, even if the reader isn't aware of it for everything, I wanted it always to resonate on some level, that like, this also speaks to some experience of, you know, that I'm having. And so that was the constraint in the world building. And I also like, what you need in world building are like some constraints, right? Because otherwise you're just like, it's like, and this, and this, and then this, and then this, and these rules. And so that sort of made it into like a nice logical puzzle, of like, how can the rules work so that it's fun and it's a good read and it reflects something deep about the experience of motherhood.
Awesome, thank you. Are there any other questions before we move into our writing time? Yael has a prompt for us. Oh, wait, Jolene has questions. How do you organize your work? Scrivener, what does the process look like? Oh, I love a process question.
Yeah. You know, I tried using Scrivener once, and I think I'm like, no matter what I use, I just use it as like a document that I throw everything into. You know what I mean? Like I just like the technology is lost on me. So I just use Google Docs. Like I just have like, and I'll have like multiple Google Docs open, where it's just like, where I'm like, it's like, here's one where I'm just like trying to figure out like what's happening at every moment in every world. And like, here's one where I'm trying to like, just like, I chart it just by the psychology of like, if you were saying this, you know, if you were telling this whole story just by the psychology of what's happening, what is it? And here is one where it's like all about the marriage of the two characters and how and that's like and then I have one where it's like, I take all that and I try to put it all together in the simplest way. And that's the only way that I can do it. I also, toward the end of that process, where I was like trying to make everything work, I did have my like beautiful mind moment for like, I had everything on index cards, and just like a whole wall of my home was like index cards, and me like putting them around like, okay, this is what's happening in Hannah 42's world, this is what's happening in the real world, or like in the main world of the story, this is what's happening. And that sort of I think that was like, there were like 10 minutes where that was super helpful. And then I began to lose my mind, and spent another few days losing my mind in that part of the process. But those 10 minutes were magical when it was really working. Yeah, I'm trying. I mean, I think that's me. I mean, it's not a very interesting process. My process is Google Docs and some index cards. Well, I have, if there are no more questions, I do have, oh, there's also a warning from Tim that the Pokemon movie is torture. Yeah, I would have to agree with that. Um, I have a writing prompt, so if there are no other questions, I'm happy to just go right into that.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And then I
Okay.
will turn off the recording when folks are writing, and we can come back together after the writing prompt at about 12:50 or so.
Sounds good. Okay, so I'm gonna apologize in advance. If this writing prompt does not speak to you, use your, feel free to go off. I did feel like when I wrote to Shasta and Chloe, I was like, I'm so sorry. Like, this writing prompt is the most psychoanalytic, psychotherapist writing prompt I think I could ever come up with. But I just like it grows out of the reading I did and sort of the piece I was doing so very organically. So I thought I'm just going to run with it and see if it sparks anyone. So what I want you to do is I want you to write about or out of, depending on what kind of stuff you're writing, a moment of true internal conflict. So what I mean is by that is like a moment where one part of you or your character or whoever you're writing about really wants one thing and another part wants exactly not that. And they might know that, or it might just be in the behavior that it's coming out. So like an example of like a mind truly divided against itself on the page is Lily Bart in House of Mirth. So like we see over and over, it's like she desperately wants to like marry a rich man, and then she like brings herself to the brink, and then she always does something to like totally mess it up, like oversleep or go to a picnic and stuff. Like, so like that's like a mind truly divided against itself. Like one part of her knows she wants this, another part of her is behaving as though she doesn't. And so, but it could be like a big one, a small one, something for you, something from someone else, but some moment of internal conflict. That's that.
Excellent. Thank you. You are all welcome to write. You can leave your screen on, turn it off, and we will come back together at 12:50. Thank you, Yael.